Welcome to Saroyan on Screen, a year-long look at the cinematic and television stories of William Saroyan. I'm your host, Chris Garcia. Today we look at Saroyan and MGM after the human comedy. While there was at least some acrimony following Saroyan's leaving MGM after not being chosen to direct the human comedy, it was not actually the end of Saroyan's association with the studio, nor those who worked there. There was, however, some issue between Saroyan and Mayer that Saroyan absolutely played up for the Hollywood gossip mongers. It's true that Saroyan did often refer to Mayer as the con, for what he saw as a bait and switch when Mayer bought Saroyan's treatment for the human comedy but did not let him direct the picture. All this played out publicly while Saroyan and Mayer spoke on the phone, exchanged at least a few letters and telegrams, and encountered each other in person at least once. A complicating factor here was that Saroyan had enlisted in the army and was newly married. Saroyan had been in contact with MGM throughout the production of the human comedy, and one letter in particular showed that Saroyan wasn't happy with MGM and was talking about it. I'm now at work on a new play, tentatively entitled Get Away, Old Man, which I shall produce in New York very early in the coming season. The play is now half finished, and will be finished this Sunday, May 10th. If purchased now by Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, sight unseen, I will let it go for $250,000. He added that after May 10th, he would be auctioning off the work with a starting bid of $300,000. Get Away, Old Man is a play about a Hollywood executive and a writer. The executive, Mr. Patrick Hammer, hires a writer, Mr. Bird, to write Ave Maria, the greatest story ever written for the screen. The two go back and forth, with Hammer calling in his bulldog fixer, Mannheim, to get Bird to finish Ave Maria. In the meantime, Bird has fallen in love with Martha, a player at the studio, and goes off to marry her, leading Hammer to have to figure out exactly how much it's going to cost him to get the Ave Maria script out of Bird. Story-wise, it doesn't bear much resemblance to the situation between Mayer and Saroyan during the lead-up to the human comedy, but there are some things that make it clear what's going on and who is who. He makes sure to feature a player piano. Saroyan had requisitioned a player piano and a number of piano rolls for it when he got an office of his own on the MGM lot. That fact had been widely reported on in the trades, including by Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper. That would have made it instantly recognizable that Saroyan was Bird, though many audiences probably would have figured that out anyhow. Much of the audience figured that all of Saroyan's works were autobiographical. Mannheim was clearly meant to be Eddie Mannix, and he was presented as a heavy. Mannix was considered to be exactly that by most in the MGM orbit. He was the legendary cleaner, erasing scandals from Mayer constantly. The real key to this is the way Hammer is presented, which clearly commented on Mayer. The first is that Ave Maria was specifically being written as a way for Hammer to atone for his sinful life and leave behind something of true loving value. Mayer had wanted Saroyan to write a piece that was a celebration of America and full of Saroyan's well-known optimism. That may actually be Saroyan mythologizing himself in his writing, since most of the surviving record of their interaction comes from Saroyan himself. It was clear that Mayer liked Saroyan, enjoyed talking with him despite seemingly have very little time to spend with him. The sinful life that Saroyan wrote about would have been shocking at the time, but today is absolutely old hat. Hammer calls a young starlet with the intention of bedding her. In the 80 years since, this theme of an executive seducing a young actress may feel a bit played out, but it was still fresh at that point. Later biographers of those around MGM noted that Mayer, and others, likely abused several of the young starlets, including Judy Garland. That sort of thing was never made public, and if Get Away, Old Man had been a newspaper report or newsreel, it would have been quashed by Mannix. That it was being said in a play made it a much more difficult matter. While Saroyan had written the play, it was not performed until November 1943. While Saroyan had written the play in 1942, it was not performed until November 1943, and not published until May 1944. The existing letters between Saroyan and Mayer seemed to end shortly after the release of The Human Comedy, the latest being April 1943. Saroyan, for his part, claimed that Hammer was not Mayer, but an amalgamation of many Hollywood types. Either way, the play was a flop, and George Stevens, famed filmmaker and later army buddy of Saroyan's, said he couldn't understand how a talent like Saroyan, having written a masterpiece like The Human Comedy, could turn around and write something as bad as Getaway Old Man. And that was from one of his friends. The critics savaged the piece, and it ran for only 13 performances. As noted in our last episode, Saroyan had said he had let go of his anger over the professional differences with Mayer in a letter written after Saroyan had paid a visit to the set of The Human Comedy. Mayer sent a very nice note to Saroyan on February 27, 1943, after the initial release of The Human Comedy to theaters. I know you will be thrilled and happy over the splendid reception given The Human Comedy by the press and everyone who has seen the picture. The reviews are wonderful and all unanimous in feeling that this is a picture the public will love and enjoy, and which will be an inspiration to everyone. My congratulations to you, Louis B. Mayer. It was already well known that Saroyan was unhappy with the picture. He expressed this privately, and according to an entry in his journal from March 10, 1943, he was going to telegram Mayer a piece of his mind. Whether or not he did can't be established today, but by that point it's likely Saroyan was just too hampered by being in the army to send pieces like that to Mayer. Saroyan did stay in contact with several figures who he thinly veiled in the play, including Eddie Mannix. One letter written by Saroyan on April 25, 1944, while Saroyan was with the Army Pictorial Service. This would have been after Getaway Old Man had come and gone through Broadway, though slightly before it was published. It also would have been about a month and a half after The Human Comedy had been released in theaters. It also would have been more than a year after The Human Comedy had been released in theaters. Saroyan notes, "It was most kind of you to remember me, and to let me know, even though in theory at least, or according to the gossip columns, you and I are not speaking, and all that sort of nonsense." His portrayal of Mannix as Mannheim was certainly gentler than his portrayal of Mayer as Hammer, and thus perhaps there were no hard feelings. After all, Eddie Mannix certainly understood that it was show business, and hurt feelings aren't matters for business. Saroyan makes an interesting confession in the letter. "I must let you know that not long ago I got in touch with your people here, and had them let me have another look at my two-reel one-reeler, The Good Job, which I have been thinking of ever since it was made as perhaps the noblest little film ever made, and discovered it does stink. As you and Mr. Mayer put it, I think it was the word stink that burned me up, but stink it does, and there's no use any longer for me to imagine that it doesn't." Saroyan mentioned that Mannix should say hello to his buddies, still affiliated with MGM, Sam Katz, Mr. Mayer, George Cukor, and Music Boy Freed, who he saves for his final name. This letter, like those with Mayer, might have been trying to smooth over things with the studio at a time when he knew waters were going to get rough. Saroyan may well have been trying to make sure that MGM doors stayed open, at least slightly cracked, if he ever wanted to get back into the pictures. By the end of the letter, Saroyan hints that he'd like to get back into the movie game, noting, "After the war, I'm going to make a picture I know you are going to like." An interesting note was a letter Saroyan sent to MGM, specifically Sam Katz, Eddie Mannix, and Louis B. Mayer, on March 2, 1946, asking if they were interested in selling back the motion picture rights to The Human Comedy. A couple of weeks later, Freed sent a telegram asking Saroyan to urgently call him at the studio. And then an official response letter was sent April 15, 1946. In it, 3 copies of the contract for The Human Comedy that had not been signed in 1943, and an explanation of why they were sending them for a signature. It turns out that as Saroyan was away in the army, some paperwork had fallen through the cracks regarding the separation of movie and book rights. It's unclear what Saroyan was thinking about doing with the rights, but this was not the last time he was in contact with MGM on that very subject. Saroyan began exchanging letters with Dori Sherry in 1950. Dori started in theater and came to MGM, was fired, worked with producers like David O. Selznick, and then came back to MGM. By 1950, MGM was in a bit of trouble. They had posted their first annual loss ever in 1948, and Sherry was brought in to bring the studio back to life. In 1950, Saroyan got in touch as Sherry was producing an anthology film, The American Saga, which would be released under the name It's a Big Country, an American Anthology. It told 7 different short stories, each with its own production team, one of which was led by Clarence Brown, director and producer of The Human Comedy. It's unclear if Sherry had gotten in touch with Saroyan or if Saroyan had cold-called him trying to get his stories included in Sherry's film. The Stolen Bicycle, a story from Saroyan's Dear Baby collection, was specifically mentioned, as was The Parsley Garden, though that wouldn't be filmed for more than 35 years. He also mentioned that his collection, The Assyrian, where The Parsley Garden had appeared, was just out, and one of those stories would be appropriate. Dori didn't want any of them. A few months later, Saroyan wrote Sherry about potentially filming his newest short play, The Bad Men. In that letter, he comes out and says, "I'd be interested in an exclusive arrangement with Metro. If you speak with Mr. Mayer about it, please tell him I send him my best." The Bad Men would eventually be filmed for the Omnibus television series. An episode we'll do later in this series. At that point, Sherry and Mayer were already butting heads in a power struggle at MGM, one which would eventually force Mayer out of the company he co-founded. Saroyan had significant money issues at the time, and they would only get worse as the 1950s continued. He clearly wanted a deal in Hollywood, and while pursuing Sherry at MGM, he was also in communication with King Vidor, David O. Selznick, RKO, 20th Century Fox, and Hal Roach Studios about various projects. While Saroyan's most recent filmed offering, The Time of Your Life, had not done particularly well at the box office, he was still hoping to get more film work. He also began to look at television writing work. Sherry had not managed to turn around MGM's fortunes fully, but had given them a bit more comfort in the box office. Saroyan sent a screenplay for My Heart's in the Highlands to MGM, but Sherry didn't believe it was a compelling screenplay. "I'm sorry, but the material is too scattered for me to believe that it would make an effective and commercial motion picture," Sherry responded. It's unclear if this was the same script that would be used for the television adaptation of My Heart's in the Highlands that would be produced later in the 1950s. Saroyan apparently wrote several versions of the play for the screen between 1950 and 1968, though it's difficult to tell which were ever commissioned and which were simply Saroyan preparing for a hopeful purchase. Saroyan sent over many stories over the next 3 years until Sherry was fired from MGM in 1956 after a string of expensive flops. Saroyan was also in contact with Mel Ferrer. Ferrer, the co-founder of the La Jolla Playhouse in California, was familiar with Saroyan, and when Ferrer joined MGM in 1952, almost instantly Saroyan got in touch, pointing out that his play, Jim Dandy, would make a good picture. He even had a cast in mind: Charles Boyer for Fishkin, Jimmy Durante for Jack Arrhythmia, and Ferrer himself as Johnny. It seems as if Saroyan was as interested in getting a film made of one of his stories as he was of getting one of his plays produced at the La Jolla Playhouse. With Ferrer, he could double dip. Saroyan's closest associate at MGM was Arthur Freed, Saroyan's drinking buddy when he arrived in Hollywood in 1941. The pair were friends, and much of Saroyan's studying in the lead-up to his planned directing of The Human Comedy had been visiting Freed's set. He also provided some feedback on Freed's film, Panama Hattie, over a long lunch. The first cut of the film had been something of a wreck, but Freed saved it and turned it into a moneymaker. How much impact Saroyan had is unknown. One of the most interesting dead ends in Saroyan's relationship with MGM was the 1956 film Invitation to the Dance. This was the first film directed solely by Gene Kelly, Saroyan's friend from the days of The Time of Your Life's first Broadway run. Invitation to the Dance was produced by Freed, who had initially brought Kelly to Hollywood years before. Freed contacted Saroyan about providing narration for the anthology dance film. Perhaps Freed felt that the audience of the time would need narration to fully grasp the meaning of the dances. Saroyan was receptive to the idea, and since the film had no dialogue, simply dance, perhaps a narrator would help clarify things for the audience. The picture included a lovely Hanna-Barbera cartoon dance scene called Sinbad the Sailor. Kelly danced live with cartoons as he had done with Jerry Mouse in Anchors Away a decade earlier. The contract offered Saroyan $250 for writing the narration himself, and a total of $1,000 for delivering the narration. Saroyan saw an early cut of the 2 live-action sequences and declared them great. He wrote short introductions and transitions between the chapters, and some of the writing is as poignant as Saroyan could muster. But the final film does not contain any narration. Saroyan wrote a letter to MGM detailing that he had been contacted by Freed to provide the narration, and he had written it and sent it to Freed. He had spoken with Freed and Gene Kelly, and both indicated that it was good stuff. In Stanford, there is a telegram from Freed to Saroyan. Like the suggestions, and would like to complete this with you. Agreement is being drawn up. I'll be back in the studio Thursday or Friday. Saroyan visited MGM the following week and spoke with many of those involved with the production. Saroyan had wanted some changes to the contract, but MGM never got in touch, and he was still asking for $1,000. It's not clear exactly what changes were needed, but Saroyan certainly wanted the $1,000. I have never made any cagey point of pretending I don't need money when I do, and if I ever needed it, I need it now. Notably, the film was a flop, another in a string during MGM's rough patch. It appears that was last attempt at a direct project with Freed, and it's clear that Saroyan took the invitation to dance fiasco as something of a personal slight. Saroyan's money issues were real, and Freed letting him down does seem to have spoiled their relationship for a while, though not too long. In 1960, Saroyan and Freed were in contact again, this time about The Subterraneans, a film based on the novel by Jack Kerouac dealing with the beatnik scene. Freed sent Saroyan a copy of the script along with a few records. Saroyan apparently greatly admired the records, and replied to Freed's contact. This is a special area of art and reality, which has its specialists, especially Kenneth Rexroth, who knows jazz, San Francisco, poetry, the kids who've tagged themselves beat or beatific, and people in general, inside and out. Saroyan met with Rexroth, who had always been an admirer and would correspond with Saroyan several times. Rexroth sent Saroyan a note after Saroyan had spoken with Freed. Let's hope something comes from the movie. I still wish you'd write it. More fun it would be to appear in it. Tell the man the record does not represent the jazz poetry at all. I have a very good band, the best musicians in the area, and we have come far beyond that. I can send him tapes. The film was released with Leslie Coran and George Papart starring, and was one of Freed's final films for MGM. Reviews were very negative, and it was also a box office bomb. The soundtrack, composed by Andre Previn, was well received. The Beats, especially Allen Ginsberg, hated the film. Of course, Saroyan was always trying to leverage the human comedy. He was again in contact with MGM about securing the rights for a television series in 1943. He wrote Dory Sherry in 1953 to see about getting a copy of the original contract, to find out by reading the tedious text if usage of the title, The Human Comedy, is available to me in a television series, if the characters, along with new characters, are available to me for usage in new situations and stories, that is, in new writing. He added that he was also willing to do a new edit of the original film with any unused footage and write and recite a writer's introduction to it, and furnish the studio with a brand new money-making property, and just a little royalty of the gross for myself. In early 1963, MGM was apparently in the midst of creating a new television series using the characters and setting of The Human Comedy. While the original contact letters are not in the Saroyan papers, a response from Benjamin Melniker, MGM's general counsel, stated, "Since we own all of the rights necessary for us to proceed with the production and distribution of our television series, I trust that you will also appreciate that we cannot make any further payments for rights which we already now own." Saroyan hated that he had sold the rights instead of leasing them, but leasing rights was a practice almost unheard of in Hollywood at the time. Nearly every property was bought in full and in perpetuity by the studio. It is unclear whether or not this led to a pilot that was eventually shown on CBS's Summer Playhouse. In 1970, he made contact with MGM again in an attempt to wrest the rights to the human comedy away when the rights were coming up for the then required copyright renewal. Instead, MGM sent Saroyan a contract, simply stating that he would continue to hold the rights as he always had, notably the publication rights, but that MGM would renew their copyright on the rest. This appears to be Saroyan's last contact with MGM. MGM, at least the MGM that Saroyan had interacted with since the 1930s, died several deaths, though many point to the purchase of MGM by Kirk Kerkorian in 1969 as the end of what would have been Mayer's MGM. Mayer himself had been gone from the studio for 15 years and dead for 12. Kerkorian, who grew up in the same neighborhood as Saroyan and very near the Manassian family, sold off portions of the studio, including their back catalog and lots, and largely used it to fund new mega resorts, such as the MGM Grand. Saroyan, though, would not completely abandon the pictures. Even in his final years, he was working to get studios interested in his stories for adaptation. Next time, we step back in time just a bit to World War II, and Saroyan's time writing for the Army and working with George Stevens in the special unit of the Army Pictorial Service. Thanks for listening to Saroyan on Screen. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.